And also, no answer for the Phoenix Suns, a Game 5 rout. LA scoring only 85 points. They're shooting below 35%, low marks of the LA LeBron era. James did not sugarcoat his team's performance post-game. Take a listen.
We got our ass kicked. I mean, it's just that simple. They got to whatever they wanted to get to in this game, and we got to be better, obviously, if we want to force a Game 7. I look forward to the environment. Obviously, our Laker faithful going to give us a lot of energy. I look forward to the moment. I look forward to the challenge and see what brings out the best of me and my teammates.
All right, Perk, the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers now one game from an early playoff exit. LeBron never lost in the first round in his career. What is your faith in the Lakers' chance to rebound with AD status still up in the air for Game 6?
Well, you know what? I got the ultimate faith in LeBron James because I believe Anthony Davis is going to play in Game 6. I believe the role players are going to play better at home, right, Rachel? And Brian, this is the problem, right? The role players did not perform last night. The Phoenix Suns role players, their youth core outplayed this veteran core. And I saw it from the start of the game when they ran the first play for KCP and he passed up a wide open 3-point shot. And in my mind right then, I said, it's about to be held in the cell. And it was. The Phoenix Suns took off because, look, they're not shooting the ball with confidence right now. They scored 10 points in the second quarter. 10 points? I don't care how stellar your defense is. You cannot score 10 points in a playoff game in the second quarter and when you're missing one of your best players and expect to win the game. One of these role players or two of these role players have to step up like a Rajon Rondo and Dwight Howard did for them last year throughout the course of the postseason.
Rachel, here's what I saw. I saw LeBron come out with the Heat eyes in that game. I'm going to do this, and he played that way for a few minutes. And then he saw how his team was playing. And maybe his strength in his ankle isn't there. And maybe because Andre Drummond and his team wasn't hitting shots and the Suns were packing the paint, maybe he's really fatigued from this crazy last year, maybe 100 different things. He figured by the end of this first quarter, it wasn't happening. And, I could just see him. I could see him say this wasn't happening tonight. And, it was clear when he walked off the court at the end of the game. He's like, okay, we're going to try this again. So the question is, tomorrow, here in L.A., in front of the crowd, when he goes back to the eyes, is there going to be enough help to do it? Is he going to be physically able to do it? Is he going to be able to lift his team? So far to this point, the answer has been no. I'm not putting it past him because of who he is, but he went to the gas last night and it wasn't there. And there's a dozen different reasons, and I just don't know how many of them are solvable, even if they somehow get through Game 6 and 7 the rest of the way here.
Well, I will say the same thing I just said about the Nuggets-Blazers game. If the Lakers need to see what it means for other people to step up in the absence of one of their big stars, look across the court at the Phoenix Suns. Yes, Anthony Davis was missing last night. Guess what? Chris Paul missed part of that game last night. Chris Paul could barely move his arm in games 2 and 3 of this series. And yet you have seen the other Phoenix Suns players play their hearts out, even in the games that they lost. And that is what Lakers fans want to see from their club, especially because there is a little bit more of a ticking time element with LeBron and this Lakers team. People age, and I know LeBron James has been almost inhuman in the way he's been able to keep up over the past couple years, long past when other guys have seen their bodies and their game break down. But he is a human being, and we have already seen him being more injury prone these last couple seasons. When other things happen, like Anthony Davis gets hurt, or there's COVID and a bubble, other things come into play, and there's just not that many years left for a peak level LeBron James and the LA Lakers to win more titles. So every chance, every playoff game that goes by, the opportunity and the stakes feel so much bigger, and this game tomorrow is going to be just enormous for the franchise. All right, guys, it's an enormous day in the NBA, so we have even more coming up on Chris. We've been talking about this book for months now. What inspired you to write it?
There were so many inspirations. Basketball, of course, as you guys know, I had to retire quite early, and it happened very quick. And, I found myself in a space where I needed to find the next thing. And although it was tough getting through that experience, what came out on the other end was me appreciating the game of basketball. And when I said the game of basketball, when I tell people the game of basketball, I mean the whole thing. I mean every AAU trip. It started in St. Philip's Little League biddy basketball in South Dallas for 10 and under kids. And just the countless coaches and teachers and parents that really helped me get to this point. I just reflected on all of it. I'm appreciative of all of it. And it's just amazing for me because basketball is all I ever wanted to do. And it was my dream. And I put everything into it. So now I just wanted to leave something as a memento for the game. And, I pretty much reverse engineered my basketball career and, recounting those lessons and those stories that I feel were most crucial in my success.
So, Chris, I've written a couple of books, and I know that you're a perfectionist when it comes to the process of this stuff. Like you've done documentaries, and Rachel, I'm still trying to get him to do something with the footage he's got from the 2010 free agent process. But he says, I've got to make it just right. So, knowing how you go about your process, what was this like putting something like this together that I know that you're careful with putting your name on?
I've read the book 13 times.
Whoa.
And the 13th time was actually reading the audiobook. It was funny. People were asking me, are you going to read the audiobook? I said, of course, I have to. Just the editing process. I knew between editing and writing and doing all these creative things and trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together, that along with my team, it was, huge challenges, but you have to love the process. And I really did. I enjoyed the process, reading the book over and over again and making sure that my voice is correct and I'm saying the right things and I'm going over what I'm about to say, because it was a little scary. You put these words out, they're out there forever in the universe. And so I wanted to be very careful with what I'm putting out there, but at the same time, drive the necessary points home and make it that universal message to where anyone could understand.
So Pat Riley wrote the foreword to this book. Now, Pat Riley has recruited you in your career, but here you had to recruit a guy who, before the pandemic, got tens of thousands of dollars to speak, much less write something. What was the horse trading to get Pat Riley to write this?
I just came to Pat. He's been an excellent friend, mentor. He's always been just a great sounding board and just a phenomenal person. And just to go through what we went through together throughout the championship years, and then more challenges when I wasn't playing anymore. That was the toughest time. Coming out on the other side and just being able to have a friend and talk about life and talk about these things, it was great. And then, I asked him to do it. You never know, you never know, because he takes things so seriously. But he's, we were the same in that instance. He went above and beyond what I thought he would do. I mean, it was touching what he wrote in the foreword, and I mean, it was like one of those things where we kept calling, like, "Hey, Pat, you got you got it."
Right.
Yeah, I'm working on it. But then, he comes through in the last moment.
I think it speaks to the class of both of you, Chris. I know that when your career ended, there were some difficult questions about your health. You and the organization weren't always on the same page, but you and Pat treated each other with such respect throughout that process, and to this day, again, says who you are to the public. I want to get you on one of the biggest series of the playoffs before we let you leave. Bucks Nets is going to be a crazy second rounder. What are your expectations for how that series is going to go?
It's so fast.
Was really no longer, as currently constituted, one of the championship favorites. That certainly factors into it. 18 years is a long time running an NBA. He's been in the league for 44 years total. Listen, there was some conversation in recent months about maybe doing one more year, a possible succession plan that maybe would have included somebody outside the organization. But I think when Brad Stevens had interest in moving up, leaving coaching and taking on Ainge's role and just being president of basketball operations, and that was something ownership was behind. They obviously know Brad Stevens very well. They spent 8 years with him. They saw him make the transition, college coaching to the NBA, to NBA coaching, which is a dramatic adjustment. And this is going to be another dramatic adjustment. You've seen Lawrence Frank in LA coaching to the front office with like a year in the front office in between, or a year as an assistant general manager to running a team. And so I think for this Celtic organization, they did value having some continuity And I think especially once Brad Stevens was ready to walk away from coaching.
Yeah, it's interesting. You hear news like this, you start thinking about the last conversation you had with the person. I saw Danny on the court just this past Friday. We had a long chat. He was super comfortable, relaxed, which is not necessarily what I would have expected for a guy who was already down in a playoff series, but he seemed very at peace, and now I have a feeling about why. And he also was very certain to tell me that he had confidence in the future of the organization. He's like, we've got 2 All-Stars who are under the age of 25, and he said that Brad Stevens should be with this organization as long as he wants, as far as I'm concerned. I didn't know when he told me that he meant in this new role, but I guess he already knew back then. Now, Brad Stevens obviously in position now to pick his successor for Celtics head coach. Any insight on where he is leaning with that?
Well, I think it's too soon, Rachel, to really know exactly a small pool of candidates for this. I think Brad Stevens has to really think and take time to think about how he wants his team to play, the personnel changes they might make, who's a fit, who he can work with, and really get out and understand the landscape and who's available to him. Because the coaches who might be available right now, who may not be available right now, could be by the end of the playoffs. We have seen plenty of times where coaches who lose in the postseason either are fired or decide to walk away. You know, we are still in the first round of the playoffs. So it's possible that pool of candidates could become even bigger. But I certainly think, you know, for Brad Stevens, he's going to be going through a learning curve as general manager or as president of basketball operations. How much of a learning curve do you want to have a coach who hasn't been in the NBA before or who hasn't been a head coach in the NBA? I would have a hard time imagining him going back to college for the Celtics next coach. But this is a coveted job. They have very good talent here. It is still the Boston Celtics. And I think this is going to be a job where there's going to be a lot of interest in it. And I think Brad Stevens and the Celtics have time now to really go out, get to know some people, spend time with people. They don't have to make a quick decision here.
Well, they have the opportunity to do more than just the same old candidates. And I know there's a lot of Celtics fans and people around the NBA who hope that they really do that kind of search. Now, lastly, Woj, because apparently all institution-changing news must break in the same couple hours, we also found out today Coach K will step down at Duke after next season. Why was this the right time for him?
Well, he's going to turn 75 next year. Certainly, you've seen a changing of the guard in college basketball. Roy Williams just retired. And, you know, I think certainly for Mike Krzyzewski, you got to decide how much longer you want to do this. And I'm told that John Shire, his associate head coach, will be the coach in waiting. They did very quietly here in the last few weeks a coaching search with their new athletic director, Mike Krzyzewski. And they talked to coaches like Tommy Amaker, and I think some coaches who had some Duke ties. But John Shire was there as a player, certainly. He's been there, helped recruit, led the recruiting on Jason Tatum, Zion Williamson, and now he has a year to recruit for his program as Mike Krzyzewski finishes up and kind of has a farewell tour in this last season.
Well, I'm very happy they didn't try to go after Chris Collins because we're keeping him at Northwestern. Thanks so much for joining us, Woj. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rach.
All right, so as we dig in here a little bit more on the Celtics and Brad Stevens taking over for Ainge as president of basketball operations, Stevens spoke earlier today about his new role. Take a listen to this.
The thought of going into this position, was never even a thought, because Danny was here and he was the best at it and he's the best to work for. I really have enjoyed coaching. I loved coaching, and I've loved coaching the players both at Butler and here. But this is the new challenge, and this is what we need to do to hopefully be even better. And, again, I think a big part of that is hopefully I can use my experience as a coach to help not only find a coach, but be a good, supportive, empowering person like Danny has been to me of a coach.
All right, I'm now joined by our insider, Brian Windhorst, and former champ with the Boston Celtics, Kendrick Perkins. So let's start with you, Perk. What was your reaction to all of this news as it was breaking today?
Well, it wasn't surprising to me about Danny Ainge. I talked to Danny Ainge. We have a very close relationship, and I talk to him at least 2 times a week. And it's not about basketball. Every time he calls me, he keeps me on the phone for an hour and a half, 2 hours, talking about life, talking about his grandchildren, talking about his children, how he loved being around his family. And over the last 2 years, as we started having those conversations more frequently, I started realizing, I said, Danny is going to retire soon, or he's going to walk away. You could just tell he was leaning in that direction. Now, as far as Brad Stevens, far as taking over the front office job and taking over Danny role, that was surprising to me. I wasn't surprised that he stepped down as a head coach, because I could, as covering the Boston games late at night, working for the Boston Network, you started to see that it just wasn't a connection there with him and his stars. The camaraderie wasn't there. And I pointed that out a few times. So Brad moving up to the front office job, I think is great for the organization. Him finding another coach, which I think it should be Sam Cassell, just my humble opinion, a guy that won the championship there with the Celtics. I like that move. So now it's just in Brad's hand, but he have to be very, very careful, Rachel, on who he chooses as the coach, because we all know that Boston fan base is real harsh on the decision making for us bringing someone in to lead the charge.
I'm going to be a little coarse here because I just want to get straight to the point, because I know that Danny had a great career. The last 4 years, the Celtics have underperformed out of their front office. Out of everything that they've done to set themselves up.
Be a little careful. They've been in the Eastern Conference Finals 3 of the last 4 years prior to this
That's
year.
what I'm saying. You're right. I'm going to be a little coarse, but they fell behind. They had a great opportunity to build a juggernaut with this team, and they just didn't do it. And they've fallen behind the at least 3 teams in the East: Brooklyn, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia. And when you look at them going forward, all of these draft picks that they could have traded for stars, they didn't. And so I don't know if today is not the day to have an introspection about that. The other thing I would say is that Brad Stevens, I'd like to know the answer to the question, why is Brad Stevens better for the Boston Celtics as the team president than the head coach? And that question was asked in this press conference several times to ownership, to Brad, and there wasn't a good answer that was given. Maybe there's a truth that they don't want to say. This was a terrible season for the Celtics, very much of a disappointment. Not all of it their fault. They paid a tax because they went deep into the bubble last year and then had to come back. All of those teams, we're looking at the Lakers struggling, the Heat are gone, the Nuggets are scrapping to get out of the first round. I understand that. But it's been the Celtics have underachieved a little bit. The good news is they do have 2 young stars on their roster, and so whoever gets this coaching job is going to have a great opportunity. And the person I would say to keep an eye out for is Chauncey Billups. Kevin Arnovitz of ESPN.com just came out with his annual list, which is read so closely across the NBA of the next great coaches. He's predicted some of the great young coaches have come through. Number 1 person on his list that came out today, Chauncey Billups, former Celtic. Keep an eye on that one.
I love the idea of Chauncey. I love the idea of Sam Cassell. I hope that they both get serious consideration. It is interesting. You talk about the pressure of having that Boston Celtics job. Just the way you're talking about it right now, Brian, and you're not wrong at all that this was not a good season in terms of what the Boston Celtics expectations are, because they were scrapping just in the play-in to get into the playoffs. But again, when you look at a team that made the Eastern Conference Finals 3 of the previous 4 years. The Clippers have never made a Western Conference Finals in their history.
And Rachel.
And by the way, to Danny's point that I relayed in our conversation from the other day, they've got 2 All-Stars under the age of 25. They were still in the playoffs this year. And yet you are 100% correct. A huge disappointment in Boston to have that kind of season, and with the assets that Danny had set up for himself over those past couple years, it begs the question, Perk, what do you think the expectation is going to be with this team in an Eastern Conference where it's funny, I saw on the internet all morning, the Brooklyn Nets broke the Boston Celtics. I don't think they broke the Boston Celtics in this series. Everybody on that team, if you gave them true serum, would tell you that the Nets were going to win that series even going into it. But the fact that the Brooklyn Nets will probably be one of the dominant powerhouses in that conference for the next few years, it puts the Celtics in a tough position and under a lot of pressure, right, Perk?
Absolutely. And this is, right, playing in the city of Boston, they have high expectations, right? The city of champions. And they just want to see the development of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown continue to rise and be the future superstars that we think that they can become. But also they want to make sure that they surround them with the necessary pieces that fit so that they could take it another level or take a leap above those teams that got better in the offseason, like the Brooklyn Nets and the Milwaukee Bucks. And for starters, you got to evaluate Kemba Walker. If I'm Brad Stevens, he's been injured for about 2 years. That knee situation is nothing to play with. You got to evaluate the whole roster except for Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, Marcus Smart, Evan Fournier. So Brad definitely has his hands full. And look, the Celtic fans may grant him a grace period, but it won't be too long. It won't be for a long period of time before they start wanting the title and want to compete for a championship.
Absolutely. It's going to be fascinating to watch. Things move fast in the NBA. You never know what's going to happen. Just in the next hour, we will discuss a little more on Coach K's retirement in just 2 minutes. Take a look at this magic moment brought to you by Walt Disney World. Dame time going into overtime, scoring 55 points on a playoff record 12 threes, including game-tying shots late in both regulation and the first overtime. However, the Blazers couldn't stay with Denver in the second overtime and lost a pivotal Game 5 to fall behind 3-2 in the series. Dame's supporting cast just not providing a lot of support in the overtime periods. Look at this shot chart. This is everyone except for Damian Lillard, finishing 1 for 14 from the field. Dame scoring 17 at the Blazers' 19 points in the extra session. So, Perk, Game 6 tomorrow in Portland. We'll go with the team facing elimination. Who needs to step up the most on that Blazers franchise? Otherwise, the Nuggets and Nikola Jokic moving on to the second round.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's the bench, Rachel. Someone off the bench has to match the bench of the Denver Nuggets. Monte Morris had 28. He outscored the Portland Trail Blazers bench by himself. So whether it's Melo or Cantor or whomever is coming in off the bench, they have to come in and give them a spark in some type of way. And I'm not saying they have to go out and get 28 points, but you got to have two guys that could at least accumulate for 30 to 35 points off the bench to cancel out what JaMychal Green and everybody else is coming in for that Denver Nuggets team off the bench and the Morris kid and bringing that spark.
I'm going to be Debbie Downer again, Rachel. As you know me very well, I am accused of this often.
You are.
As I'm watching that press conference that Dame gave, which we showed at the top of the show, he's so melancholy. He just had one of the most breathtaking performances you will ever see. You have players on the court. Jokic said that it was a pleasure to be on the court. Kevin Durant said this was a spiritual experience. Dame finally misses, and Austin Rivers is looking to the heavens saying thank you. He plays 50 minutes in this game. We just saw all those stats. He had 1 turnover. This is as close to a perfect performance as I almost have ever seen. He is completely down in the postgame. And you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of LeBron. I hate to say this. It reminds me of LeBron at the end of his tenure in Cleveland, where he has poured himself out. And by the way, LeBron never had a playoff game like that. Even the greatest games that he had, maybe a little bit in his last conference finals in Cleveland with against the Magic, but even LeBron never played like that and lost. And I know he's super duper invested, but he's in his 30s.
You're talking about Dame?
Yes. We've seen this happen before. Like, what is he supposed to feel coming off a game like this? And I'm not even talking about this series. Like, let's say they come back and win this series. It doesn't change the reality of what this team is. I just don't know what this is going to portend. And it hit me like a ton of bricks watching that press conference after the game last night.
What about for you, Perk?
No, I agree with Brian, because look, Rachel, at the end of the day, we all respect Dame and his famous quote, guys running from the grind. Dame, look, you have done enough for that organization. At the end of the day, the only thing left for Dame to do is 2 things, right? Win them MVP and win the championship. But like Brian said, he's getting older. So at the end of the day, and I was saying this, if the Portland Trail Blazers don't make it to the championship this year, that duo between him and CJ McCollum, they're going to have to decide upon it and decide what direction they're going to go in, because it's been 8 years now. Like, at the end of the day, I want Dame, and people were saying it, Dame deserves better. And he does. Like, Go somewhere where you can win. No one will look down on you because we watched you carry this franchise on your shoulders and on your back. So no one would be disappointed if Dame happened to go to the Lakers.
Well, look, see, I'm just going to let that float by. That's what experience in hosting is. I'm just going to let that float. I will say this, though, that in this series, and let's bring it back to what's going to happen in this game tomorrow night, if the rest of the Portland Trailblazers need some inspiration on how to step up, look across the court at the Denver Nuggets, because here you have a team that lost its second best player in Jamal Murray, that took a guy in Austin Rivers who nobody wanted just a month and a half ago, who took Monty Morris, and they have found a way to step up and elevate and be that support that Nikola Jokic needs. I was so impressed on all sides. I thought what made that game so good last night was, of course, Dame was incendiary. But the way the Nuggets hung in, even after they kept losing leads, and the guys who were not big name players stepped up and got it done, that's what the Portland Trailblazers fans